What happens when a judge's casual laughter at a black defendant turns to shock and remorse as she realizes he is her childhood friend in need of help? The rain hadn't let up since dawn, drumming steady against the courthouse windows like a warning no one wanted to hear. Inside courtroom 3B, the air was thick with murmurs and damp coats. James Anderson stood alone at the defendant's table, wrists cuffed in front of him, his shoulders squared beneath a worn denim jacket that still smelled faintly of engine grease. The bailiff called his name and a few heads turned. James didn't flinch. He kept his eyes forward, jaw tight. He'd been in courtrooms before, traffic violations, a noise complaint once, but never like this. Never in chains. Docket 428, the clerk read aloud. State versus James Anderson. Charge, assault on a law enforcement officer. Whispers fluttered around the room like moths. A white woman in a tailored suit leaned toward her colleague and muttered, "Another one." James heard it but didn't react. He'd learned long ago that reacting gave them what they wanted. The door behind the bench opened, and a hush fell over the courtroom. Judge Eleanor Hayes entered briskly, robe swaying as she took her seat. She adjusted her glasses, scanned the file in front of her, then looked up. Her expression unreadable at first. "Well," she said dryly, flipping a page, "another hero in handcuffs. What a surprise." A few quiet snickers broke out in the gallery. A man in the back smirked, shaking his head. James felt the heat rise in his chest but didn't move. He stared straight ahead, breathing slow. Judge Hayes continued. "According to this report, Mr. Anderson interfered with an officer during an active arrest, became combative, and—" she paused, lips curling into a faint smile, "attempted to de-escalate the situation. Is that your story, Mr. Anderson?" The sarcasm hung in the air. James finally looked up, locking eyes with her, and everything stopped. The smirk slid from her face like a mask falling to the floor. Her fingers went still mid-turn of the page. Her mouth parted slightly, but no words came out. She blinked once, twice, like someone seeing a ghost in the middle of a sentence. James tilted his head, studying her with a mix of disbelief and resignation. He didn't smile, didn't blink, just stared. For a long second, the silence held. Then Judge Hayes straightened abruptly, cleared her throat, and looked down at the file again. "We'll proceed," she said, voice noticeably tighter. "Let's hear from the prosecution." James lowered his gaze slowly, a flicker of something unreadable passing across his face. The cuffs clinked as he adjusted his stance. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, the temperature had shifted. No one else in the courtroom knew it yet, but something unspoken had just cracked beneath the surface, and nothing would ever be the same again. For a split second, the years collapsed. The courtroom faded. The cuffs, the charge sheet, the tension, they all disappeared. All she saw was Jamie, wide-eyed, barefoot, grinning through a missing front tooth as he passed her the last triangle of a peanut butter sandwich beneath the cracked porch steps. The boy who could make her laugh even when her parents fought upstairs. The boy who stood guard outside her grandma's house when she cried after her father left. Judge Eleanor Hayes blinked hard, her grip tightening on the file in front of her. It couldn't be, but it was. James Anderson stood just a few feet away, older, harder, lines cut deep into his face, but the eyes were the same, searching, quiet, fierce, and now locked on hers like a challenge or maybe a plea. Her chest tightened. She glanced down, heart pounding, pretending to study the paperwork as if her hands weren't suddenly clammy. The courtroom hadn't noticed. Not yet. But she had. Jamie. Her Jamie. Her voice came out thinner than she liked. "Let's keep this moving." The prosecutor, unaware of the shift in atmosphere, droned on about police statements and resisting arrest. Eleanor nodded absently, barely processing the words. She kept sneaking glances at James, her thoughts spiraling. Why didn't she recognize him sooner? Because it had been almost 30 years. Because they'd lost touch after her mother took a job in another city and moved her out of West Philly with no warning. Because life got louder. College, law school, internships, politics, and childhood had become something folded neatly away in the back of her mind. Until now. Until he was standing there, shackled. Her throat tightened again. Jamie had once sworn he'd be somebody. She remembered the day he carved "Jaya will make it" into the old tree behind her grandma's house with a rusty pocket knife. Now he was standing before her as a defendant. She cleared her throat, louder this time. "We'll set a preliminary hearing for next Friday," she said, voice steadier now. "Bail is under advisement." James didn't react, just kept watching her. She couldn't look at him when she spoke next. "Court is adjourned." The gavel fell harder than it needed to. The bailiff called the next case, the shuffle of paperwork resumed, and the gallery buzzed with new distractions. But Judge Hayes didn't move. Not for a while. Her spine was straight, her face calm, but inside she was reeling. The boy who once swore he'd look out for her now needed her to look out for him. And she wasn't sure yet if she could, or if she dared. The door to her chambers clicked shut behind her, muffling the noise of the courtroom like a lid sealing a boiling pot. Judge Eleanor Hayes sank into her leather chair, the gavel still echoing in her mind. Her hands trembled slightly as she unbuttoned her robe and tossed it over the back of the chair, her breath coming slow and shallow. She sat still for a moment, staring at the worn manila folder on her desk, the same one she'd skimmed in court back when James Anderson was just another name in a sea of defendants. Not Jamie, not him. Now she opened the file with careful fingers, as though it might burn her. Inside, the pages told a story that shouldn't have surprised her, but it did anyway. Arrest in '09, disturbing the peace. No charges filed. A year later, termination from a factory job after a workplace incident, details vague. Denied housing 3 times in 2 years. Credit flagged. Custody dispute. Another arrest. Never a conviction, but always enough to stain. Each page added another layer of weight to her chest. She leaned back, closed her eyes for a moment, and let herself remember. Jamie had dreams. Big ones. He wanted to be a teacher. Used to line up the neighborhood kids in rows and pretend the cracked sidewalk was a chalkboard. She could still hear him yelling out spelling words like he owned the block. He was brilliant, sharp, funny, gentle. Nothing like what this file suggested. But the folder didn't lie. Or maybe it did. In a way that was more dangerous than fiction. It told the story the system wanted to believe. One of failure. Of poor choices, of inevitable collapse. She picked up the intake report again, scanning the officer's statement. Suspect became aggressive, failed to comply, escalated situation. Then she found it. Buried beneath the formal accusations, a quote from James's initial statement to the arresting officer. "I wasn't resisting. I was protecting that kid. He was just a boy." Her breath caught. This wasn't some bar fight. This wasn't some drunken outburst. James had tried to protect someone, and now he was the one in chains. Eleanor set the folder down, her fingers pressing into her temples. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, the only sound in the room. She knew this wasn't just about James. It was about all the men who looked like him, who ended up in courtrooms like hers, with files like that one. Except this time she couldn't pretend not to see it. Not when she used to share juice boxes with the boy in the file. Not when she used to call him her best friend. She leaned forward, heart pounding, and read the statement again. "I was protecting that kid." The ghost of Jamie was gone. Now she had to figure out who James really was, and what she was going to do about it. It was supposed to be a quick stop. James had just gotten off work, grease still under his nails, when he pulled into the corner store for a bottle of ginger ale and a pack of gum. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside, nodding to the clerk he saw most nights. A quiet evening, nothing unusual. Until the yelling started. He turned toward the aisle near the refrigerators and saw the scene unfold in jerky chaos. A teenage boy, no more than 16, backed against the shelves, hands up. An officer loomed over him, barking orders, voice rising with every second. The boy trembled, trying to explain himself, but the officer shoved him against the glass cooler door. "Stop resisting!" the cop shouted, though the kid hadn't moved an inch. James moved on instinct. He stepped between them, palms out, voice low. "Hey, man, he's just a kid. He ain't doing anything." The officer's eyes narrowed. "Back off." "He's not a threat," James said. "Just calm down." "Back off." The boy whimpered. His knees buckled slightly. James took one small step forward, and that's when the second cop hit him from behind. The tackle was hard and fast, slamming James into the linoleum with the force of someone aiming to break more than just his fall. His chin scraped the floor. His cheek bounced off it. The cuffs came out before he could even catch his breath. "Interfering with an officer," the second one growled, yanking his arms behind his back. The kid screamed. James could barely turn his head to see him being dragged out by the first officer, hands still in the air. "Don't move," the cop hissed, knee pressed into James's spine. And then came the silence. Later, James asked about the cameras. The store had 3. 2 pointed right at the aisle where it happened. But when his public defender requested the body cam footage, they were told it was incomplete. When they asked for the store's security video, the clerk said the system had glitched. Nothing was recorded between 7:32 and 7:45 p.m. The incident happened at 7:36. Just like that, the story changed. James wasn't a bystander anymore. He was the aggressor. A man with a short fuse and a chip on his shoulder. A man who lunged at an officer, who refused multiple commands, whose behavior escalated the situation. James stopped trying to explain. Because no one was listening. No one wanted to hear that he saw himself in that kid. That once upon a time, someone had stepped in for him. So he did the same, and now he was the one in cuffs. Again. Outside the store, the city kept moving. Sirens wailed somewhere distant. Car horns blared. Another day, another file, another man added to the system, and another truth buried in silence. The email came in just after sunset. A curt subject line, "Reminder, Anderson Case Protocol." Judge Eleanor Hayes read it twice, even though once was enough. The message was simple. A quiet nudge dressed up in bureaucratic language. Maintain standard judicial procedure. Avoid impropriety. Treat this case as you would any other. She knew what it really meant. Don't look too closely. Don't get involved. Don't remember. She closed her laptop, the screen's glow fading into the dim hush of her chambers. Outside, the courthouse windows caught the last traces of daylight, casting long shadows across the floor. Eleanor sat there in silence, her fingers resting gently on her desk. The name, James Anderson, looped in her mind like a skipping record. But that wasn't how she knew him. To her, he'd always been Jamie, the boy who built forts out of milk crates, who taught her how to throw a spiral with a football twice their size, who made her laugh so hard one summer she snorted grape soda through her nose. Jamie, who called her Ellie like it was a secret only he was allowed to use. Until one night changed everything. She was 10 when the fire started in the apartment above theirs. Smoke crawled through the vents while she slept. Her mother yanked her out of bed, coughing, dragging her down the stairwell barefoot, her favorite doll forgotten in the flames. They moved 2 weeks later, just like that. No warning, no goodbye, new zip code, new school, new life. Her mother said it was for the best. Eleanor had believed that. For a while. But now, decades later, she sat in a robe trimmed with authority, presiding over a man whose name stirred guilt like dust from an attic trunk. She leaned back, eyes scanning the ceiling. Her rise had been steady: college, law school, clerkships, appointments, each step a rung. She worked hard, played by the rules. But somewhere along the climb, she'd stopped asking who built the ladder and who got left behind. Jamie never had a ladder. He had to scale walls with scraped knuckles. And now he stood in her courtroom, his file stained with assumptions and omissions, reduced to a few dry lines of resisting arrest. The pressure was building. She felt it. From the DA's office, from colleagues who'd remind her about appearances, from within. But this wasn't just another case. And she wasn't just another judge. She knew him. Not just his name, she knew his heart. And that was the problem, because knowing meant responsibility, and responsibility meant risk. She exhaled slowly, her breath fogging the window as she stared out at the darkening sky. This case was more than paperwork. It was a reckoning. The house smelled the same: lemon polish and old wood. The floorboards still creaked in the hallway, and the same ceramic angel hung crooked over the mantel. Eleanor hadn't been back in months, years, really, if you counted being fully present. Her mother greeted her with a tired smile, more curious than concerned, but didn't ask questions. Eleanor said she was there to pick up a few things from the attic. The lie was gentle, easier than the truth. She climbed the narrow stairs slowly, every step stirring ghosts. The attic was dim and musty, cluttered with forgotten furniture and boxes that hadn't been touched in decades. Dust swirled in the slanted light. She moved with purpose, pushing aside yellowed yearbooks and old Christmas decorations until she found it. A shoebox, faded blue. Rubber bands wrapped around it twice. She sat on the floor, legs crossed like a child, and peeled it open. Inside were the pieces of a different lifetime: wrinkled Polaroids, a plastic ring from a gumball machine, the broken piece of a toy flashlight. She dug deeper, her fingers brushing over folded notes in crayon and smudged pencil, and then she saw the envelope. It had her name on it. Her old name, Ellie. The handwriting was crooked, rushed. Her chest tightened as she unfolded the paper. "I'm still waiting for you to come back. Everything's different without you." The words hit like a punch. Her eyes scanned the rest of the letter, but it was short, barely a paragraph. Just Jamie trying to make sense of her disappearance. No return address, no demands. Just that one aching line. She found another, then another. "They said you moved but didn't say why. I check the porch every day." "Did I do something wrong?" The letters were time capsules. Quiet cries from a boy she'd left behind without knowing how much it would cost him. Her mother had packed up their life with military precision, and Eleanor had never questioned it. She was 10. She didn't get to choose. Now, 30 years later, she could feel the weight of every word he wrote. Her hands shook as she held the letters close, reading them over and over until the paper felt warm. Jamie hadn't just vanished. He'd waited on a porch that never saw her again, waited with a heart that never got answers. She pressed her eyes shut, the silence of the attic wrapping around her like a heavy coat. These weren't just memories, they were proof. Proof that somewhere along the way, the paths between them had split too far to see each other anymore. And now, fate had thrown them back into the same room. But this time, one of them was in cuffs, and the other wore a robe. The knock at her door was light but urgent. Eleanor looked up from the bench, brief she wasn't really reading, and called, "Come in." The public defender stepped inside, a young woman in a wrinkled blazer and scuffed heels. Her eyes were tired but sharp, and she carried James Anderson's file like it weighed more than it should. Eleanor gestured to the seat across from her desk. "I need a continuance," she said without preamble. The woman blinked. "You're asking me for one?" "I'm suggesting you file the motion," Eleanor corrected gently. On grounds of incomplete discovery. The public defender hesitated, then leaned in. This about the footage? Eleanor nodded once. I want full access, officer body cams, store surveillance, radio logs, everything. They already said it was missing. I want to hear them say it under oath. The woman studied her, clearly trying to decide if this was a trap or a rare gift. You think there's more to this? She said quietly. I know there is, Eleanor replied. Push for it. I'll grant the delay. The meeting lasted less than 10 minutes, just enough to set the wheels turning. By lunch, the DA's office called. They didn't wait for an appointment, just sent a terse message. Please report to conference room 6A, immediately. When she walked in, 2 prosecutors were already seated. The senior assistant DA, a man with salt and pepper hair and a permanent smirk, motioned to the chair opposite him. The air in the room was stale with cheap coffee and unspoken threats. We've noticed a shift in how you're handling the Anderson case, he began, folding his hands like a prayer he didn't mean. You've made several requests outside standard protocol. I've made requests to ensure due process, Eleanor said evenly. He smiled, tight and condescending. Judge, with all respect, this defendant isn't special. He's not your friend. Her eyes flickered, just once, but it was enough. The younger prosecutor jumped in. We've heard rumors that you may have a personal connection to Mr. Anderson. Eleanor said nothing. We need to be clear, the senior one added, voice lower now. If there's even a perception of bias, we'll have to file for your recusal. Public trust, judicial integrity, you understand. She stared at him for a long moment, then stood slowly. Do what you need to do, she said. He raised an eyebrow. So you're not denying it? I'm not confirming anything either, she replied, already turning toward the door. But I'll tell you this. If you're worried about public trust, maybe start with why body cam footage keeps disappearing. The door shut behind her with a quiet finality. Back in her chambers, Eleanor sat down, pulse steady, jaw tight. They were circling. Good. That meant they were nervous. And maybe, just maybe, that meant she was getting close to the truth. The video was only 32 seconds long. Grainy, shaky, and clipped at both ends. But it was enough. Enough to crack open the story they'd tried to bury. It started with a shaky frame. Inside the corner store, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, an officer shouting, a teenager pressed against the glass door of a cooler, hands trembling in the air. The camera jostled, catching the blur of another man stepping between them. James. There was no lunge, no threat. Just a voice, low and steady. He's just a kid. Then came the swing, a baton arcing down toward the boy. James moved fast, shoulders forward, arms up, shielding the kid with his body. Then the camera cut. It hit the internet by noon. No logos, no watermark. Just raw footage uploaded to a social media account with no followers and a generic username. But the truth has a pulse of its own. It spread like wildfire, retweeted, reposted, reshared. By 2 p.m., news outlets were circling. Headlines read, Body cam footage contradicts police report in assault case. By 3, protesters gathered outside the courthouse. Students, parents, activists holding signs that read, Protect the protectors and who's really resisting? Inside, the courthouse buzzed with unease. Staff whispered in break rooms. Bailiffs exchanged glances. The DA's office went silent. Phones unanswered, blinds drawn. In her chambers, Eleanor watched the footage on a loop. Her hands were still, her face unreadable. But inside, something shifted. Someone had risked everything to make this public. Someone who saw what she saw. She thought of the court clerks, young, underpaid, invisible in the machine. The one with the buzzed haircut and nervous energy who always looked away during arraignments. She didn't need to ask. She already knew. Eleanor closed the browser tab, but the image stayed burned in her mind. James taking a blow meant for a kid. Not out of anger, not out of ego, just instinct, just decency. And now the world knew it too. By nightfall, the courthouse steps were a sea of voices. Chants echoed against stone walls, candles lit in makeshift vigils. People held photos of James, of their own sons, their own brothers. Eleanor stood at her window, watching it all from above. Not as a judge, just as a woman, a witness. This wasn't just about one man anymore. It never had been. The news vans came first. Then the folding chairs, the bullhorns, the hand-painted signs. What started as a spark had become something harder to ignore, a wave. By midweek, the courthouse lawn had turned into a gathering ground, not for chaos, but for clarity, for voices long ignored. They came with stories, with pictures, with memories of James. "He fixed my brakes for free when I didn't have it," said an older woman with silver-streaked braids, speaking into a news camera. "He used to tutor my son after work," another said, holding up a crumpled photo of James in a mechanic's jumpsuit, grinning beneath a lifted hood. "He's not what they're saying," a man added. "We know him." And they did. Old neighbors from West Philly, childhood friends, former co-workers, even a retired teacher who remembered James as the kid who always made sure the quiet ones got to speak. They didn't shout. They stood, proud, tired, angry, refusing to let the system write the ending before the full story was told. Community leaders joined in, pastors, advocates, city council hopefuls. Their voices echoed through microphones. "We want transparency. We want justice. We want accountability." Inside the precinct, the police department issued a short press release. "We are aware of the video circulating online and are cooperating with the internal review process. At this time, no further comment will be made." Eleanor read it 3 times, each one more hollow than the last. She sat at her desk that evening, lights dimmed, her robe folded neatly beside her. The courthouse clock chimed somewhere in the distance, but she didn't move. Her inbox was full, requests for statements, interviews, questions she couldn't answer. Or maybe wouldn't. She wasn't supposed to get involved. Judges didn't take sides. They enforced the rules. But what if the rules were broken before the case even began? She looked out the window. The crowd outside had thinned, but the candles remained, flickering against the dark like tiny acts of defiance. This was bigger than James. It was bigger than her. She thought about those letters in the shoebox, about a boy who waited on a porch for a friend who never came back, and about the man he became, standing tall in a courtroom full of eyes, refusing to shrink. For the first time in years, Eleanor didn't feel like the one in power. She felt like the one being watched, by history, by justice itself, by the boy who used to call her Ellie. And she knew, whatever happened next, she couldn't look away. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled. Reporters crammed into the back, sketch pads and camera lenses pointed forward. The air was electric, buzzing with tension, waiting to catch fire. Even the walls seemed to lean in. Eleanor took her seat, her robe heavy on her shoulders, her expression carved from stone. But underneath, her heart beat with a dull, relentless drum. She knew something was coming. She just didn't know what. The bailiff called the session to order. The prosecution reviewed their version of the facts. Clean, clipped, clinical. A store disturbance. An aggressive man interfering. A resisting suspect subdued. Then the public defender rose. "We'd like to call a witness," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. No prior notice was given for his safety, but he's here. Heads turned as the doors opened. A teenage boy, skinny, maybe 16, maybe younger, walked in wearing an oversized hoodie and nerves like a second skin. His eyes darted across the room before settling on James. He gave a barely visible nod. James nodded back, just once. The boy took the stand. "What's your name?" the defender asked. "Marcus." "Marcus, were you in the store the night of James Anderson's arrest?" He nodded. "Yes." "Can you tell us what happened?" Silence stretched. Marcus looked down, gripping the edge of the chair like it might float him out of the room. Then he spoke. "He told me to back up," Marcus said. "The cop. I did. I wasn't doing anything, just buying chips." He swallowed hard. "Then he said I was acting jumpy. Told me to put my hands up. I did that too." "Then what?" the defender asked softly. Marcus glanced at the jury, then at Eleanor. His voice cracked. He said, "You move again, and I swear I'll put you through the glass." A ripple passed through the room. Someone in the gallery gasped. Eleanor's breath caught. "And James?" the defender asked. Marcus looked at James again, his voice barely above a whisper. "He stepped in front of me, told the cop to chill, didn't touch him, just said I was a kid. He tried to help." Tears welled in his eyes. He wiped them with the sleeve of his hoodie. "They slammed him down like he was some animal, like he wasn't even a person." The courtroom was silent. Not even the reporters moved. Eleanor stared at the boy on the stand. Her jaw tightened. Her hands clenched beneath the bench. For the first time in a long time, her mask cracked. Not enough to shatter, but enough for the truth to slip through. This wasn't defense. This wasn't strategy. This was a child, telling the truth. And the system had nearly swallowed him whole. The courtroom was still. The kind of still that presses against your skin. No whispers, no movement. Just eyes, hundreds of them, locked on the bench where Judge Eleanor Hayes sat, spine straight, breath slow. James sat quietly at the defense table, his hands clasped in front of him, eyes lowered. Marcus had been escorted out moments earlier, shaking but braver than anyone else in the room. The DA had no rebuttal, no questions, no defense. There was nothing left to say, except from her. Eleanor looked out at the courtroom, officers in uniform, reporters with pens poised, citizens holding their breath. She rested her hands on the bench, her fingers tight around the edge. "I've served in this courtroom for 15 years, she began, her voice low but clear. "I've seen cases that break your heart, and cases that test your faith. But what I've witnessed over the course of this hearing, what we've all witnessed, goes beyond a single moment." Her voice didn't rise, but the room leaned in. "This is not just about Mr. Anderson. This is not just about a boy buying chips in a store. This is about a system that allows certain stories to be written in ink, permanent and unquestioned, while others are erased before they're even spoken." She paused, swallowing hard. "When I looked at the original report, I saw a violent man, a repeat offender. But what I saw in this courtroom was a man protecting a child, a man whose actions were misrepresented, whose voice was nearly silenced, not because of what he did, but because of who he is." James looked up slowly. Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, regret, resolve. Eleanor turned back to the room. This court cannot undo the past. It cannot erase what has already been lost, but it can take a stand. She straightened the papers before her, but didn't read from them. "All charges against Mr. James Anderson are hereby dismissed." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Someone clapped, then stopped. The silence snapped back like a stretched rubber band. "I am also formally requesting an independent investigation into the conduct of the officers involved," she continued, her voice shaking now, not from fear, but something deeper. "This court will not be complicit in injustice. Not today. Not on my bench." She didn't look at the prosecution, didn't wait for applause. She just lowered her gavel, once, firm, and stood. James remained seated, frozen in the moment. Eleanor stepped down from the bench, not as a judge, not as a symbol, but as a woman trying to make something right. Her voice had trembled, but her decision did not. The courthouse steps were slick with rain, but no one seemed to notice. People lingered, still buzzing from the ruling, some holding signs, others clasping coffee cups in trembling hands. The protest had softened into conversation. Strangers hugged, a few wept. Somewhere nearby, someone played a low, steady rhythm on a hand drum. James stood near the sidewalk, hands in his jacket pockets, his breath fogging in the cool afternoon air. He watched the crowd, not as a symbol, not as a headline, just as a man trying to breathe again. He didn't hear her approach, not until she spoke. Jamie. His shoulders tensed. That name hadn't touched his ears in 30 years. He turned slowly. Eleanor stood a few feet away, her robe long gone, replaced by a dark coat and cautious eyes. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just looked at him like she was still catching up to the moment. He gave a small nod. "Judge Hayes?" The corner of her mouth twitched. "Ellie," she said quietly. "At least I used to be." They stood in silence for a beat, the sounds of the city muffled around them. "I should have found you," she said. "Back then, after we moved." He didn't answer right away, just glanced up at the sky, gray and low, like it might cry for both of them. "You were 10, he said finally. "Wasn't on you." "But I never came back," she said, "and you wrote." His eyes met hers, steady, kind, but tired. "I waited," he said, "for a while." "I'm sorry," she said, the words falling heavier than she expected. He nodded once. No forgiveness, no grand gesture, just acknowledgement. "That kid you protected," she said. "You saved him." James shrugged. "Felt like saving myself." She didn't argue, just looked down, hands clasped in front of her like she was still holding a gavel. Then she looked up again. "I don't know what happens next," she said. "Neither do I," he replied. "But I know what happened today." Another silence settled between them, but this one felt different. Not sharp, not sad, just real. A few reporters spotted them from across the plaza, cameras raised. James gave a small wave of his hand and turned slightly so his back blocked the shot. Eleanor chuckled under her breath. "Still got my back, huh?" He smirked. "Always." The clouds shifted above them, not quite parting, but softening. Somewhere behind them, someone yelled his name. James turned, nodded, promised he'd be right there. He looked at Eleanor one more time. "You did good," he said. "Not just for me." She blinked, and for the first time that day let herself breathe a little deeper. Then he walked away, and she let him go. Not back into the shadows, but forward, into whatever came next.